Hi, I'm your host, Jürgen Strauss from Innova.Buzz, and I'm really excited to welcome to the Innova.Buzz podcast today from Tel Aviv in Israel, Dr. Zohar Bronfman, who's the co-founder and CEO of Pecan AI, a company that designs systems to put predictive power into the hands of business teams, blending the rigorous logic of computational neuroscience with a unique philosophical perspective on predictability. I'm really excited to dig into that. Welcome to the Innova.Buzz podcast, Zohar. It's a great privilege to have you as my guest.
It's my pleasure, Jürgen. Thanks for having me.
Now, before we dive into our conversation today, quick note for our listeners, especially if you're new to the podcast. Each episode's a candid and practical conversation with a remarkable guest, just like Zohar. And I like to explore their knowledge, attitudes, values, and how they translate into action, hopefully for you, the listener. Now, I start with the big picture, dig into stories, and then strategies, actionable ideas, and I always end up with our signature buzz round, the same three questions I ask every guest, and all the resources and highlights, as always, will be in the show notes, so you can revisit anything that sparks your curiosity later on. Now, Zohar, I'm really looking forward to our conversation. As I said, it's fascinating how you focus on giving organizations the ability to act with foresight, using all the data that all organizations have these days and using it to predict the future effectively. Can you share more about the driving mission behind your work and what tangible impact you aim to make in the world today?
Absolutely, Jürgen. So let's take one step back and ask ourselves now, in this era where AI is so predominantly discussed in every corner of every business, what is it? What is it, AI? What does it do? And the answer to this question is obviously broad and diverse, but in principle, AI is a machine that is trained in predicting something. That's the essence, that's the basic of what AI means. Now, what does it predict is a completely different question, and different AI systems specialize in predicting different things. AI is a very broad term, and it includes things like, for example, generative AI like ChatGPT, or image creation systems. They are specialized in predicting tokens. Tokens could be a set of pixels, or a set of texts, or characters, or words, or sentences. That's their speciality. And recently, we've all seen the great revolution of ChatGPT and other large language models, that they were kind of able to predict very complex tokens, so that it seems like they are generating even a conversation, or a very good summarization, or stuff like that. Again, all of that falls under the bucket of making a prediction. Another branch of AI specializes in predicting events. Rather than predicting tokens, it predicts events. Events that are documented in the data as a certain transaction, or a flag, or a timestamp, or any other way that a table would encompass events. So let me give you the simplest example, Jürgen. Think of maybe just sales. You have historical sales in your company. Maybe every day you have a certain amount of revenue you've been able to generate, in the simplest way possible, with the historical revenue that you've been able to generate throughout the years. You could potentially predict how much revenue you're gonna create tomorrow, in a week from now, in a month from now, next quarter, next year, and so on and so forth. That's maybe the simplest form of generating predictions, and um, slightly like, call it, the cornerstone of ancient AI Sometimes it's called regression. Sometimes it's called time series. It's a very simple form of AI. Very much like the extreme development that we've seen on the side of generative AI, where you are now able to predict very complex textual statements or images and so on. The field of predictive AI has also seen massive development. Now, businesses can basically take their data and ask very nuanced and complex questions about their business. So for example, if it's in history, you could only have a rough estimate of your revenue next month. Today, you can know in a very high level of accuracy what each and every customer in your business is going to do at a specific point in time. So you're basically kind of generating a very sophisticated view of everything that you are going to experience as a business owner or as an operator or a marketeer, a salesperson, or whatever that might be. The ability to know in advance what's going to happen to your business, we see it, or I see it at least, as one of the most important aspects of what it means to run a business in the middle of the 2020s. That's, to me, is the future of optimizing businesses' assets, those being in turn their data sets.
Fascinating. So if I'm understanding this correctly, the um, data analysis, the predictive AI, it's taking, because in the past you mentioned briefly uh, going back and doing mathematical analyses, which computers obviously can do with data and can do very quickly. So you can do regression analysis and perhaps predict sales patterns going forward based on, will it be the same as historical? So if I understand correctly, what you're saying is with predictive AI, you can drill down a level further and say, what's each customer going to be doing? And am I correct in saying that you can even then say, what if we introduce a new product, for example? What if we discontinue this particular product or this particular product line? How does that impact our sales going forward?
Yes. So the short answer is basically everything you can think of that has some historical data for you as a business, you could potentially generate a future simulation or prediction. So to kind of piggyback on your example, Jorgen, you can theoretically say, here is a new product I'm going to introduce. It is similar to the other product that was introduced maybe 2 months or 2 years ago, I should say. And how is this product going to perform given this current context of my business compared to the way the other product performed back at the time? So if you have the historical data, and the amount of historical data would be a function of the actual question you're asking, but if you have the historical data, a solid AI model nowadays would be able to extrapolate something meaningful about the future. It interestingly relies on the fact that human behavior, which is ultimately what drives businesses, all businesses are affected first and foremost by human behavior. Human behavior is an extremely predictable thing. We think humans are very hard to predict because we are humans ourselves and we are limited to the abilities and inabilities of our cognitive mechanism to make educated guess or about people's future behavior. In reality, though, people are extremely predictable. There are some scientific researchers who have shown that sometimes you can scan the brain of a person and know much, much before the person has even reached the decision itself, what is going to be the action that person is going to make. Even even in a driving simulation scenario, 5 junctions before the junction you got to, they could say you are going to take the right turn. And this is obviously just one anecdotal example, but it just gives us the understanding of how much hidden statistical patterns there are in our database. And we take advantage, or we leverage a small fraction of it in our day to day.
That's fascinating. And it's fascinating because I know your background is in neuroscience and also philosophy. They're your dual PhDs, right? And with that background, to end up running a tech company is an interesting journey. What you've just mentioned with the behavior. So I'm trying to understand this. There's a lot of data we have historically as a company, right? The product sales of XYZ product over the last 5 years has been this. I've got all the data. I've got data broken down by which customers have bought it, when have they bought it, which customers started buying at a particular time, which customers stopped buying. I might have information in my CRM about the reason particular customers purchased and the reason perhaps they stopped purchasing. Some of those reasoning is starting to delve into that behavioral part that you talked about, right? So what else is there that comes into the behavior pattern that comes into those predictive models you're mentioning?
Yeah. So a good way to think about it is building predictive models is a little bit like an onion. You have the core, and the core would be the actual core behavioral data you want to predict. If you want to predict, for example, a future transaction, first and foremost, get the historical transaction. That would be the core of the onion. But then you can add additional layers that supplement the statistical signal that could potentially predict that behavior. So as you mentioned, it could be, for example, other than the pure transactions that are obviously very crucial, for example, maybe there are marketing activities that you took as a company that obviously affect people's tendency to conduct or not conduct a transaction. So you will add the marketing data as an additional layer. Then maybe you have not only the call it advertisement or digital work that you've done, maybe also you have promotion. That's another data set you want to include. Then maybe there's a data set that is actually related to the weather. So apparently we've spoken about how people might act in a certain way independently of quote unquote what they think or feel. Weather carries a huge influence on our behavior. When it's sunnier and nicer outside, we behave differently than when it's wintry and cold. So even the weather, holidays, special events, all of those peripheral data sets can also affect our behavior. And the list goes on and on. The point here is that the more data you introduce to the model, the more historical data the model can analyze, the higher the likelihood it will capture the specific likelihood for a certain event in a higher fidelity or higher accuracy.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I do a little bit of trading on the share market actively as part of my managing my portfolio of investments, and I always remind myself that there's a big component of of what a share price is doing that bears no relationship to the fundamentals of that company, the economic environment that we're in, any other factors, but they rely wholly and solely on human behavior and the behavior of the people investing in that company at the moment. So that it kind of reminds me a little bit of that, and I wonder how AI could be used in that scenario, because clearly predicting are the masses going to buy or sell this stock gives you some insights into where it might be headed in the short term.
Exactly. So just as an interesting anecdote, your intuition is spot on. In fact, to the best of our knowledge, like people who practicing predictive AI, the first documented um, modern use of AI and machine learning with computers to actually predict something business related took place during the 60s and 70s in a company that tried successfully to predict shift and movements in stock price. And they became absolutely huge to this very day based on that algorithmic trading that they founded. And many other companies followed suit. And we know that many of the transactions in the stock market are driven by some form of predictive AI. I should say that this field is notoriously complex. So it's not like you only need a good model. There are many other considerations when it comes to the stock market, including even the ability to transact quickly and relay your bid. But in principle, even the marketplace, which is extremely complex and influenced by so many different factors and so many different levels, definitely could be predicted.
Yeah, I think there's so much data we have in our everyday life, right? And it's the complexity of these things are very analogous, I guess, to the share market. So there's a level of complexity, and as human beings that might have a particular skill set, we don't understand all the complexities always, and this is where the predictive AI sounds like it has a big application. What do you suggest businesses need to be doing today in the light of all these developments in terms of, first of all, gathering the right sort of data? Because I know a lot of businesses are still in the phase of like the 19th century almost. They write things down in a notebook, and one person might remember 50% of that, but the whole company doesn't have that information. And secondly, starting to use the data that they do have in a much more value capturing way.
Say, first and foremost, every business, it doesn't matter what they do, have to realize that in this era, in this age we are living, the data that the business generates, the proprietary data that the business generates, is by far its number one asset. Some companies have already understood this. They understood that they have proprietary data, unique data, and they then monetize and leverage their unique data to continue and excel in gathering additional unique data. That is a shift in thinking rather than thinking solely on your value proposition as a business. I recommend tying that to the data you generate and create, and that then you can further leverage to enhance your value proposition, to grow as a business, and to generate additional proprietary data, because data has become one of the biggest differentiators. Many other aspects of running a business have become a commodity. And then it's very hard to compete. It becomes a race to the bottom. No one wants that. So gather as rich and as differentiated data as you can, and then use high-end sophisticated systems to leverage that data so that your value proposition is enhanced. That can be through improving customer experience by, again, anticipating what people might do. It could be by improving your operational efficiency, improving your margins, by better allocating internal resources, pricing better, making the relevant adjustments to your supply chain if you know how much demand is going to be, where and how, changing your marketing strategy based on the future performance of your campaigns. The spectrum of options is huge. Once you have the data, you can start making these types of predictions that would be extremely specific to your business. The other thing I usually talk about, and I think is extremely important, I think we should be very careful in applying AI for the sake of applying AI. What we've been seeing is happening, and I think it's actually a very bad thing. We are seeing companies that say, our board of directors told us we have to do AI, or, the CEO has made a decision we're going to be an AI-driven company. But they're not really use case or process driven, and they're not really seeing the end result in front of them when they think about implementing a certain AI technology. And here my recommendation is, imagine you have the AI system that implements in 100%. No system does 100% of what we expect it to do, but let's say you have a system that does 100% of what you would want it to do. What is ultimately the value levels that you are able to push and pull? What is ultimately the value that you would be able to report back and to kind of show for all the effort of implementing AI? Because one thing that everyone has to recognize, implementing AI, and it doesn't matter what AI you are actually choosing, implementing AI is not a double click effort. It might look like that in a demo, it might look like that in an advertisement, but in reality, implementing AI is a project, not to say a product. And you have to take into consideration there's a process, there's a beginning, there's a middle, there's an end, there's an ongoing maintenance, ongoing improvements, change management. It's always a significant effort to implement AI, and you have to be very clear on what are you trying to achieve. Otherwise, you'll be paying a lot of money for something that sounds cool, looks cool, and fills up slides in a executive presentation, but doesn't really move the needle when you end up measuring the effect.
That's a very important message. And I think one of the things you said there certainly is, I mean, in the simplest form, when we all use AI every day, I'm reminded of it every now and then. You can ask a simple question and often you'll get a rubbish answer, or I get a rubbish answer, and I realize, well, I didn't give it enough information. I didn't ask the right question. So I will then go on and work through that exercise, and I might then feed it more information. I might then ask further questions. I'll end up having a conversation, and an hour or two later, I might have some value out of that. But it's exactly the way you said, and I imagine the predictive AI is exactly the same. It's not my first interaction and boom, I've got the value. I do need to put some time, effort into building that system until I get the value from it.
Exactly. Exactly. And just as a nice quick anecdote that some of our listeners might find amusing, there are tools that help you generate code. So on the face of it, when you generate code, you obviously save a lot of time in actually coding. But apparently, when it comes to more complex coding projects, the time you save from coding, you end up investing in fixing bugs and validating the code that was created by the LLMs. So, it's slightly funny and also slightly concerning. We have to kind of think about it in a bigger framework. What does it mean to really implement AI and see value out of it? And it's not to say that LLMs don't drive significant efficiency. They definitely do. But again, you have to be very specific in what are you trying to achieve, in what context, in what framework, and how are you going to measure it. There's no silver bullet. There's just no silver bullet.
Yeah, in some ways, it's a new technology, right? I mean, we lived through the age of the internet and computers and the birth of computers, and yeah, there were huge time savings there. But again, it was a case of people thought you turn on a computer and now all of a sudden I my job's going to be really easy, whereas it was just a shift in the way I did my job. And yes, there were some things that were a lot easier. Now I can focus my energy on other things. And one of the things I like about what you said earlier in the predictive AI and being really focused about how you integrate it into a business was the idea of what what does that enable you to do? And you mentioned a whole bunch of examples that to me, I think that's the essence of this AI revolution is what does it enable you to do in a human sense? So providing a better customer service, being more efficient with your customer, spending more time actually getting to know your customer, which gives you a lot more behavioral data that you can feed back into the predictive model. But most importantly, for me personally, it's that element of the human connection, being human, because I think that's one part of human behavior that we can all predict is that going forward, we're going to be looking for that human connection. We're going to be doing business with other humans. We'll do business with people we like and trust and know.
Absolutely. I think historically, whenever, like you mentioned, whenever there was a very big qualitative leap in technology, historically, we weren't there, but we know there was the industrial revolution, and all of the sudden machines were able to do the work, the labor of humans in a better, more efficient way. Obviously, computers, the internet, AI now. Whenever there were such leaps, humans adapted. That's the point that history tells us. Humans adapted. Ultimately, we're not working less, we're working differently. And that is a very important take home message from my point of view. I don't think AI is going to make us lose a ton of jobs or have so many people unemployed or, have you and me work 1 day a week and the rest will be done by machines. I don't think that's the case whatsoever. I think it will free a lot of time in some areas and will demand more time in others. One of those areas is definitely going to be a human relationship, business relationship, social relationship, conceptual relationship, because we are built as a mind to collaborate with other humans. That is how our brain is wired. And we will have to have human collaboration. We will just have to have it. And there are also researchers showing that it's far easier for us to trust a human liar than a machine that tells the truth. That's how wired we are towards collaboration with humans. And um, other than the social relationship, I also think we would become far more invested in improving our creativity and outside of the box thinking. This is something we all do all the time. Everyone is doing outside of the box thinking all the time. However, we don't practice it as a profession. It's not like many of us, only very few, but most of us, we don't see ourselves or define ourselves as creative thinkers or out of the box thinkers. In the post AI era, where much of the call it more mundane day to day thing could potentially be automated, there's gonna be an extremely higher value for creativity of that kind, because this is something AI is incapable of doing, at least at this point in time.
Mm.
And that's
Yeah, well,
why I
that's
believe we would be required to enhance AI's contribution by our unique creative thinking.
mm. Yeah, I think that's a very important point, and it's one of the questions that I always ask of myself is what simple and practical steps can we take to develop that skill of creating brand new original ideas if the AI is doing all the combining and exploring of old ideas that are already in the public domain and it has access to.
Yes, so exactly that. AI is very good in exploring or recombining existing ideas. When it comes to creating new original ideas, it's incapable of doing it on its own. And that's why, again, as you mentioned, I argue it's an area for us humans, to double down and invest in. There are many different ways of developing creativity. Some come from, different mind games or exercises. Some come from different simulations that are kind of forcing us to find solutions that are exceptional and do not follow the regular pattern of thinking. But ultimately, it's the combination of how AI works and how we leverage AI outputs that would create this, call it human machine creative collaboration. And this is where I recommend, at least, and this is what I also do myself, this is where I recommend people to use AI not only for helping them do things they do today, but also try and use AI in inspiring you to think about things that you haven't thought about quite yet. Whether you are seeing a new space of a problem and you're trying to maybe think, maybe there's another way to think about it. So let's take a very simple example. Maybe you are a marketeer and maybe you're trying to generate some uh, new customers to your company. There's the non-creative thing, or way of thinking about it, which is I'm going to spend X amount of money on that channel and Y amount of money on that channel. Classic marketing thinking, nothing wrong about it. There's a very good chance that predictive AI, for example, is going to be better in predicting where you should be spending your revenue based on your historical performance. However, marketing is constantly reinventing itself. There are always things you can do that go beyond just advertising more at a certain channel and so on and so forth. Taking everything AI has to offer and reframing the entire problem space in a way that these are my customers. This is what my company is doing. These are the campaigns I'm doing today. What are even the options for generating additional customers? Thinking about it from a system point of view rather than from a tactical point of view would ideally help you come up with creative outside of the box ideas that could then dramatically change how marketing is being done altogether. And we are starting to see these types of things happening even with some customers at Pecan, where all of a sudden they have some predictive model that help them allocate investments in the different marketing channels. They can take a step back and ask themselves, in this big picture of my marketing, what's really missing or what could be the X factor? And maybe that's launching a mini game that is completely not related to the actual company's value proposition, but has some nice hint about what the company is doing and generates some traction. Maybe it's a completely different um, user journey that is more amusing or that captures the eye in a different way. The answer is obviously not mine to suggest. It's just another way of thinking that AI can really um, free you up to do.
Yeah, I really like that. And as you were describing that, I thought of some really, I think, clever ways of actually doing that and getting AI's help. So in my corporate career, I facilitated a lot of workshops, creative workshops, and I used various tools to generate out of the box thinking with the participants. One of the tools, for example, was some of Edward de Bono's work or Tony Buzan's work, or there's a bunch of these ones where you take a structured tool and they did a whole lot of work on thinking mechanisms and training your brain or forcing your brain to think differently than the traditional path. And it generated some amazing ideas with people. And then, of course, you went back and analyzed those ideas. So I'm thinking you could tell the AI, help me think this through in this light and using this model, using this process. And then the ideas you come up with, document all those, and then go back to the AI again and say, okay, here's the idea I have. Tell me how this can fit into my business model, my business philosophy. What are the traps? How would I go about addressing those gaps, and really build on the idea from there? So I see that really neat use of AI there.
Couldn't agree more. Couldn't agree more. The access AI has today to knowledge is far higher, obviously, than the access we or our mind has automatically, obviously. So as long as we sit behind the wheel and we guide that system and we kind of spark it with our spark, with our creative spark, and we are able to um, consume what AI gives us, and we are able to put it in the right context, refine it, and then again do these iterative motions of here's my spark. Can you supplement it with all the knowledge you have access to? That is the exact type of collaboration that I see is going to be um, basically leading business efforts in the next years and maybe even decades. I think from a purely technological point of view, LLMs are probably getting to a mild saturation in how they're going to further improve by improving their size or training data. It's not that they're not going to improve, but the leap, the major qualitative leap, has happened 2 or 3 years ago. Now it's going to be incremental improvements. So if I have to make a bet on what are the skills I would recommend someone to develop, it's exactly what you described. I have my AI system. It doesn't matter if it's a predictive one or a textual one or whatever that might be. I have my AI system. I have my creative, unique spark, and I'm going to create this loop, this feedback, ongoing loop between those two, so that ultimately the end outcome is my creative spark within the massive amount of knowledge and data that the AI can access, and obviously as a human can't.
Yeah, certainly not in that sort of speed. Uh, even even I find myself going to AI to refresh my memory on certain things that I do know and I could probably access either from my brain or from my bookshelf, but it's much faster through AI. And then, of course, I have the knowledge to fact check it against what's in my brain and what's in my memory, which is the other big issue, I guess, is it is important to have some fact checking in that loop.
Absolutely. The whole concept of hallucinations is inherent to the networks, to the AI, the LLMs architecture. It hallucinates by design, and the hallucinations are being um, expanded upon as the network is being increased in size. So, in other words, now that we are chasing bigger and bigger models, the likelihood that we'll be able to prevent hallucinations is even reduced. Hallucinations are going to be out of the game, full stop. And from that perspective, again, it is the fact checking, the human triangulation, the critical thinking that is going to be an utmost crucial component in our, AI human collaboration. And it's very important to remember it. We can never take anything at face value.
Yeah, some really important points there. It's been a fascinating conversation and lots of insights that you've shared with us, Zohar. I think it's a good point now, though, that to move on to the buzz, our innovation round, the same three questions that I ask of every guest. And ideally, we'll get some short, punchy answers that the listener can translate into action today. So, you all set?
All sense.
Okay, so the first one's around innovation. What's the most innovative way you've seen AI used to strengthen human relationships?
So I think the most innovative way is by actually simulating a collaborative environment that makes you feel like you are part of a society and you can exchange ideas. I've seen prototypes. I don't think it's out quite yet, but it really made me feel like I'm seeing something which is the future of um, remote, digital, and physical on-site work combined.
Fascinating. Yeah. Yeah, that's reminds me a little bit of when these what's the right word for them, like Zoom and Teams and that the
Video
video calling
conferencing.
through,
Yeah,
yeah, video conferencing through the internet first came available, and all of a sudden now we can talk to anybody in the world at very little cost and work together with them in real time. Yeah, yeah, exciting stuff. All right. Based on your own experience, what's the best thing you've done to integrate AI in a way that enhances human connection?
so I would say for sure. I mean, I was biased here, but I think uh, ultimately what Pecan does, as we mentioned, is helping organizations make predictions. And from that perspective, the numerous customers that have been working with Pecan have been able to improve customer experience for their businesses. And you can see the amazing success stories of the different collaboration between different departments now being able to collaborate more effectively due to predictions, or even collaboration between people who were not responsible for making predictions and people who are responsible for making predictions in the organization that now is being empowered to a certain a collaborative framework.
Yeah, that's a fascinating side effect, and I've heard quite a few people talk about this in various AI tools, not necessarily Pecan, but other AI tools as well. That it brings people together. It kind of enhances the communication between silos, as it were, in the organization, and yeah, I think also there's a motivational effect from that. So you see people that are involved in one area, and all of a sudden somebody not involved in that area is starting to get more insights into that area and understanding why are those people doing what they do. And it's a bit motivational as well as enhancing, I think, the productivity of the whole organization.
It's completely. I just want to say one more sentence about that because I really think it's cool and exciting. Uh, we have so many cases of people who are not trained in making predictions in their day to day. Obviously, they are maybe business analysts or BI analysts or product analysts or marketing analysts. People who are doing their Excel day to day, and all of a sudden, they use Pecan. They start making predictions about the future. They become, so to speak, data scientists, and then they go on and they change their title on LinkedIn from, say, a marketing analyst to a data scientist. It's very hard to explain the degree of gratification you get as an entrepreneur, as a founder, where you see people that basically got promoted just because they used your tool. I think that's in B2B, that's probably as high as you can get.
Yeah, well, it's more than promoted, isn't it? Their self worth. They've elevated their self worth themselves in that
Well
sense.
put.
Mm.
Well put. Agreed.
Mm. Yeah, yeah, I imagine that is very gratifying. All right, final question of the buzz round, and we've talked a bit about skills that we need to be cultivating in the age of AI. What's the number one thing you think anyone can do to differentiate themselves by leveraging AI today, and particularly prioritizing that authentic human connection?
I had to choose one thing. I would say be interdisciplinary in your education and thinking. I think it's very important to be an expert, and we all become very, very expert in something in our career life. But it strikes me too often that people relatively little understanding of adjacent or even non-adjacent areas and fields. And I think coming back to the creativity point we've mentioned earlier, I think if you can enhance yourself with even a certain level of understanding, you don't have to be expert in 500 other fields, but if you can enrich yourself with a certain level of understanding in other fields, it could dramatically improve your creativity, which in turn will dramatically enhance your ability to generate impact with AI. That's how I think about it from a bird's eye view. Enrich yourself with different domains. Sometimes it could even be things like learn a little bit of history or learn a little bit of philosophy or chemistry. And that could actually facilitate creative thinking that will influence your corporate, say, focus on, I don't know, IT.
Yeah.
That's, I think, my best recommendation. And it's also super interesting and fun. So there's no downside for doing
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. Well, certainly, that's something that I always enjoy doing, is digging into some other areas. And a good example of that, I mean, it's a personal one, but we recently traveled to Japan, and I started exploring some of the philosophies there, and the Zen philosophy. But one of within that, there's a philosophy called wabi sabi, which is the beauty of simplicity and the beauty of imperfection. And I thought that's an interesting thing. And I combined that with my photography and started thinking, well, where does this apply to my photography? And I thought, well, often I'll photograph a beautiful landscape or a beautiful building or a street scene or something. And so I started looking for things that I normally perhaps would overlook. Like even in my garden, then I started discovering here's a broken log that I've just tossed to the side, ready to throw in the next garden collection thing. And there were mushrooms growing at the back end, or a fungus type of fungus growth. And so I photographed that and started to see all these different things that I thought, well, there's beauty in everyday things that we tend to ignore. So it kind of sparked a new style of photography that I was doing from time to time.
That really resonates on so many levels, Jorgen. So many levels.
Right. Well, this has been a fabulous conversation, Zohar. Now, where can people find out more about you and the work you do at Pecan AI, and maybe even reach out and say thanks for what you've shared?
Sure. So, first of all, everyone are welcome to Pecan.ai if they want to learn about predictive AI and personal level. I'm more than happy to connect with folks over LinkedIn. It's just Zohar Bronfman, and I'd be more than happy to exchange notes on these topics.
Excellent. And we'll have those links in the show notes, of course. So, wrapping things up, what's a specific action our listeners can take today based on our conversation to start sort of thinking more about what we've discussed, maybe applying one or two concepts?
If you work at a business or you own a business, make sure you collect and generate proprietary data that can set you apart and propel your value proposition.
Yes, very important point there. And good quality data.
Sure.
Excellent. Well, sorry, you were going to say something?
No, yeah, I agree. It's just super important. We can't stress it enough.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, thanks so much for sharing your time and your insights with us so generously, Zohar. I've really enjoyed the conversation. There's been some really valuable insights today. I'll have to go back and listen over and over because there's some ideas buzzing in my mind as we've been speaking, and there'll probably be more if I listen back again as a listener, not as a participant. So thanks again. It's been fun. Please do stay in touch.
Thank you so much, Jorgen. I appreciate it. I enjoyed our conversation too.